Welcome to the Cyber Insider, Emsisoft's podcast all about cybersecurity. Your hosts today are Brett Callow, threat analyst here at Emsisoft, and I'm Luke Connolly, partner manager. Our guest today is Allan Liska. Allan's a senior security architect and ransomware specialist with Recorded Future. With more than 20 years of experience in ransomware and information security, Allan has improved countless organizations' security posture using more effective intelligence. He provides ransomware-related counsel and key recommendations to major global corporations and government agencies, sitting on national ransomware task forces and speaking at global conferences. As a leading voice in ransomware and intelligence security, Allan is regularly cited in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and NBC News, and has authored numerous books, including The Practice of Network Security, Building an Intelligence-Led Security Program, among others. He's also the creator of the first ransomware-themed comic book, yours truly, Johnny Dollar. Allan, welcome. And first off, maybe you can tell me about this comic book. Is it based on actual people and incidents?
So it is real life adjacent, I will say that, with a little bit of wish fulfillment in there. So some of the things that we can't really do during an incident, Johnny gets to do, which is kind of nice. We have a 4-story arc that we're working on. We just released the digital version of the first one. The print version will be out November 1st. And Brett Callow, among other security researchers, does make a cameo in the comic book.
That's awesome. You're known as the ransomware sommelier. How did that come about? What's the story there?
So Sean Lingus, who now is with CNN, but started off with State Scoop, or at least that's how I knew him, or Cyber Scoop, I guess, was writing a story that he quoted me in, and he couldn't remember my title, so he called me the ransomware connoisseur, kind of as a placeholder, meaning to go get my actual title, and then he forgot, and his editor didn't catch it, so I got published in that particular article as the ransomware connoisseur. And I joked with him that I'm actually more of a ransomware sommelier because I help pair the right ransomware with the flaws in your network security, like a good sommelier does with wine. I am actually a certified sommelier, so that's kind of cool. And the name just kind of stuck, and I enjoy it. So it's a kind of a fun little thing.
How much blame do you think we, as in the cybersecurity industry, shoulder for the current state of cyber insecurity? We often point a blame at companies when they get breached, but do we need to be looking at ourselves more? If they're not using MFA, for example, do we need to be thinking more about why that is?
So blame for cybersecurity attacks rests solely on the attackers. They don't have to do the attacking. They choose to do the attacking. That being said, we as the cybersecurity industry are just crap at our jobs. Like, we don't do a good job. And I know that's a terrible thing to say. I work for a vendor, you work for a vendor. What we seem to be really good at is adding complexity and making clients, customers buy more gadgets to properly secure their network. Brett, you've heard my rant before, right? We started off with the firewall, and then, the firewall's not stopping everything, so now you have to buy an IDS. Well, that's not stopping everything. So now you need endpoint security. That's still not stopping anything. So you need a web application firewall. Now you need a proxy for your email. Now you need a separate email security system. Now you need this, you need that. And, you walk into any good sized network and they've got 100 different security tools, most of whom don't talk to each other. And you catching a security incident relies on you looking at the right console at the right time. So I think that And I mean, it is the reality that networks are much more complex than they were 30 years ago, but we've also increased the complexity of security, which makes it much harder to actually run an effective security program.
But having said that, are we still having businesses compromised by unsophisticated attacks? And if so, it's a question of, do the businesses not know how to form a proper defense, or do they not know or believe that they're at risk?
So I think part of it is, I'm going to fall back on one of my favorite analogies. I love 70s kung fu movies. And there's always that one scene where Bruce Lee has to fight 7 guys at the same time, right? And that is one of the problems with having such a diversity in the not only the surface you have to defend, but the number of attackers that are coming at you. Is you don't get to say, okay, I'm going to focus on improving my identity and access management this month, and then I'll worry about vulnerability management next month, because those attackers are coming at you from all sides, and you have to be able to you have to be able to stop them, and you don't get the luxury of having holes in your security. Yes, certainly there are things that should obviously not be getting through, that do. And I mean, we see this all the time, where poor vulnerability management, poor asset management are absolutely a problem and have been a problem for 30 years. We're not making it easy for people to solve that problem, though, apparently, because if we could figure out ways to make it easy, one, you'd make a whole lot of money, and two, then we wouldn't continue to have these conversations 20 years later. And I'm sure there's a vendor who's listening to this that'll say, no, my solution obviously does solve this problem. It doesn't, man. Stop saying that. Because if it did, everybody would buy your solution, and we would have solved the problem.
What aren't organizations paying enough attention to when it comes to security?
I don't know. It varies from day to day. I do think, though, that there is. So I'll give you 2 different answers, which is kind of a cop out, and and I apologize for that, but I'm going to do that anyway. Every attack, almost every attack, whether you're talking ransomware, whether you're talking nation state, whatever, needs to get access to your Active Directory, and they're almost always successful getting access to your Active Directory. I don't think enough organizations take securing their Active Directory infrastructure seriously, or they do, but they're afraid to, because they know if they make any change, their Active Directory is going to be down for 3 days, and everybody's going to hate them because they won't be able to log into their network. And that leads me to the second. I think there's not enough attention paid to identity and access management. We see too much credential reuse. Now, part of the problem is there's literally billions of stolen credentials or leaked credentials out on, out for anybody to download and get. But I don't think we pay enough attention to identity and access management, and understanding that when there are leaked credentials out there, you have to act quickly to get those passwords reset, or whatever else you need to do.
So just about a year ago at ResponderCon 2022, you reported a couple of statistics. Number one, that the number of ransomware extortion sites more than doubled from the previous year. And number two, that Recorded Future at the time, which was September of 2022, was seeing an explosion in ransomware groups, with 170 new ransomware variants reported in 2022 to that point. So my question is, how do these numbers, the number of extortion sites and the number of ransomware groups or variants, how have those numbers played out this year?
So this year, I have an intern to track those for me. And so the numbers that we've seen are about 350. Now that does include variants of Stop and Deja Vu and Phobos, which even though it's the most prolific ransomware out there, we generally don't talk about them. But it's still a much larger number than last year, even discounting those particular variants. Ransomware data leak sites are kind of a nightmare this year. I don't know if you're experiencing the same thing on your end, but they go up and down so often. And for a lot of these newer, smaller groups, their infrastructure is so rickety that just the 100 different intelligence companies and randos on Twitter that are checking their sites every day is enough to take them down. So it's a lot harder to tell, but I think we're somewhere around 170 sites that we're attempting to scrape data from.
You've called for, maybe somewhat jokingly, drone strikes on ransomware operators, and you're not alone in that line of thinking. Do you really think they should be military targets? And if so, what would that action potentially look like?
So, no, I don't think is terrible. And I know there are people that think that they are, especially going after hospitals, going after schools, going after things that are off targets. And if somebody, if a terrorist had taken out a hospital, we would be bombing the hell out of wherever that terrorist is from. But I don't think cybercrime necessarily rises to the level of extrajudicial killing. But I also know that what we're doing from a government standpoint isn't enough, and we need to take more action. So I'm going to start the conversation at drone strike and let everybody else move a little bit to the left to get closer to what I want to. Okay, if drone strikes aren't the answer, then you tell me what is the answer, because clearly this isn't working. I mean, by all numbers that I've seen, whether you're talking about the FBI report on the number of ransom payments they're tracking, whether you're talking about number of victims posted to data leak sites, whether you're talking about super secret CrowdStrike numbers that they can't share with anybody, but trust me, everything is much higher than last year. All numbers seem to point that ransomware attacks have dramatically increased in 2023. So as much work as I do think the governments are doing, and I think this is a multi-government affair, and I do think that they are doing good work, and I appreciate what they're doing, it's clearly not enough. We need to do whatever the next thing is to let the ransomware actors know that what they're doing is not acceptable and there are actual consequences for it. Not just we're shutting down your infrastructure and you're going to go sit on your yacht in the Black Sea for 3 months and then come back with new infrastructure.
So speaking of law enforcement, again, at ResponderCon in 2022, you said that a lot of law enforcement actors were looking at Lockbit, and you predicted at that time that Lockbit would have a Conti-like moment in the next couple of months, based on the statement in September of last year. They're still going strong, I think. So what happened or what didn't happen?
I don't know. It's not like they're subtle. It's not like they're not posting everywhere. It's not like they don't have an Instagram profile. It's not like people haven't figured out where Lockbit Sup lives. All of that data is out there, and if randos like us can find that, then we know that government agencies have that data. My assumption is he's been informing on the FBI on all the other ransomware groups, and I have made that claim publicly on Twitter. And if he's not, he's welcome to meet me in Poland and prove to me that he's not an FBI informant. But so far, he hasn't taken me up on that offer. So I don't know. I wish I had an answer. I was clearly very, very wrong. It feels like they've reached the point, the Lockbit RAS infrastructure feels like it's reached that point of saturation where there should have been a government action by now. And we just haven't seen anything.
As you already said, ransomware is probably as problematic, if not more so, than it ever has been. At the same time, we're also seeing more arrests and more disruptions than we ever have. They're not making a difference. What we're doing doesn't seem to be working. What do we actually need to do to see some real progress here? How can we start getting the numbers down?
So again, if we're not going to drone strike anybody, if we're taking that off the table, I think one of the things that we need to figure out how to do, and I don't know the answer to this, is take a mafia-like approach, the way law enforcement goes after the mob, because ransomware is largely enabled because of the different support groups that are out there for ransomware operators. So if you can disrupt the initial access broker, so like the Quackbot takedown is a great example of that. If you can disrupt that initial access, I think that goes a long way to not stopping ransomware attacks, but it slows them down. Because if there are no auctions out there for them to buy access and they have to get the access themselves and then carry out the ransomware attack, that significantly lengthens the time of the operation, which means there are fewer, they can carry out fewer operations. So it doesn't solve the ransomware problem, but maybe it makes it less prominent. And again, I don't know the right way to do that. How do you go after the initial access brokers, especially because if there are, hundreds of, core ransomware operators, then there are thousands of initial access brokers out there. So I don't know how you can expand into that area, but the initial access brokers tend to have fewer resources, and so they may be easier to target. And then, I mean, the other thing is, how do we keep going after the money? How do we, bring in the great work that people like Chainalysis and other companies are doing to figure out how we disrupt their ability to get paid and to launder that money? Because if we can, get them on the other end, then that's also good. The third option is they haven't paid their taxes in Russia. Maybe report them to whatever the Russian version of the IRS is, and maybe that'll help. Go for the Al Capone route. But I do think that if we can take away that support structure, again, we're not stopping the ransomware. We're just making it a lot harder for them to carry out their operations.
So if we were to go down that path, is it, I mean, we talked a little bit about technical solutions. They don't work completely. Is it diplomatic, or is it a military law enforcement / TLA 3-letter acronym problem? Or you're in London now, so it's 4-letter acronyms there.
Right.
We have FBI, CIA, DHS, and NSA in the US, and in the UK we have GCHQ and all of their 4-letter acronyms. Would it make the most sense to focus on diplomatic or law enforcement in addition to technical resources?
So, and I'd love to see what Brett thinks about this, because he may have a different take than I do. But I'm under the impression that a lot of the initial access brokers aren't, a lot of the core ransomware operators are still based in Russia. There are spread out in other parts of the world, but I think a lot of the initial access brokers are not based in Russia. And so I think there are diplomatic / law enforcement options there to not just take down the infrastructure, but also, have arrests, have arrests for those operators. We could do like we did with Raccoon Stealer and pair each one of them up with a Instagram model girlfriend and let her post their location to Instagram so that we can pick them up easier. But I think that is kind of the way you have to do it. And I think the International Ransomware Task Force has been doing a lot of great work with information sharing. We need to bring more countries into that and improve that information sharing so that we can arrest these people wherever they are. And it may not work. We may, again, just like we do with business email compromise in some of the Asian and African countries where, with all the intelligence in the world, we keep taking down these gangs, and then new ones, pop right back up. It may not work, but again, we have to keep trying, and we have to keep moving faster.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It makes sense to go after the individuals that we can reach and hope that makes a difference, because realistically, those who are based in Russia are always going to be problematic. Lots of people have pointed an accusatory finger at the cyber insurance industry as having contributed to the ransomware problem. What's your take on that?
I think that that's probably a fair assessment, but I don't think that it is a current fair assessment. I do think that they were, and again, you do what your customer wants, and if the customer wants you to use use your insurance payout to pay the ransom, then that is what they're going to do, because otherwise they'll go someplace else. But we're seeing much more rigorous demands from the cybersecurity industry now for renewing policies. There are blanket bans against using insurance payouts to pay ransom. And so I do think that they are trying to be more part of the solution of stopping ransomware. But I do think that there was a time where they weren't. And it's not every cyber insurance company. You talk to some of the cyber insurance companies that have really gone in and said, no, we're not going to support paying the ransom. We're going to be much more rigorous in who we give policies to. And they'll complain about the ransomware, the cyber insurance companies that aren't doing that are going to let anybody have a policy and so on. Now, how long they can keep that up, given that average ransom payments continue to rise, that's probably another conversation. So we'll see how long that happens. But I think from a financial perspective, the cyber insurance company can't afford to be part of the problem anymore.
Or for threat intelligence, in the interests of your clients, is it beneficial or detrimental to directly engage with these cyber criminals?
I can't do it personally, but I know, like at Recorded Future, we have some really good people that do that and do it really well, and I'm glad they're there, because I think it's just like ransomware negotiators, right? I can't get into a chat with a ransomware operator without telling him how many times I want to punch him in the face. And that's not productive when you're trying to negotiate, or at least trying to get intel on what they have on you. And same thing, I think that when done correctly, it's necessary and it can provide a lot of valuable information. The problem is there's that fine line between the ones that do it correctly and the ones that do it for sensational purposes.
Similar sort of question. Lots of ransomware actors are active on Twitter and other social media platforms. Hello, Mikhail, if you're watching this. Should that be allowed? Is it useful to have them there from an intel perspective, or should we require that the social networks deplatform them?
I don't know how useful it is having them there, but I'm also hesitant to deplatform anybody just because I don't like them. We let other criminals on social media platforms all the time, so not allowing them on I feel like that is and you can tell super American here, so the whole free speech thing is kind of top of mind to me, even if they're people that I despise. So I don't think banning them is necessarily useful either. Again, I tend not to engage them. I created a list on Twitter that I call punchable ransomware guys, and every time I find one, I add them to the list, so they don't want to engage with me either. But I do think that there are people that can get valuable intel from them. But they a lot of times they use it to a lot of times they use that social media platform to list victim shame in an easier fashion. And, as our friend Valerie has discussed, we also know they lie a lot. And so, the people that kind of breathlessly retweet everything they tweet, or share everything that they share without any kind of analysis layer there. I think that is probably, again, not behavior that I want to stop, but is behavior that probably people should have a second or third look at.
You mentioned earlier that the cybersecurity industry has done quite a poor job at protecting businesses. Yeah, I remember the first firewall implementations 30 years ago, and we've gone from there to IDS, to endpoint protection, to SIEM, to you can name as many layers of protection as you want. Where do you see ransomware going from here? What's the next evolution?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is the heavy focus on the data theft part of it. Although we just saw Black Basta resurfaced and is just doing encryption again. So who knows if they'll go back to that. And where that is interesting to me is they don't care where they get the data from. So, really, we talk about securing your supply chain, but now you also have to think about securing your data supply chain. Where is all of your data being held? Who's holding it? How are they securing it? And then who's holding their data, and how is that data, being secured, and so on. And I think that is a big area of concern right now as ransomware actors, if they continue moving down to the data theft only model. And I'm not sure that that's a fully profitable model for them compared to extort, encrypt and then data theft. But that does seem to be where a lot of them are heading.
Yeah, we recently saw an incident in which Scattered Spider, an allegedly English-speaking group, teamed up with what appears to be a Russia-based ransomware operation, which is quite unusual. Is that concerning?
I think so. I think there is a lot of I think in a lot of the younger hacker or pseudo hacker community in the West, there's a lot of hero worship of the ransomware actors, and that's a problem. They're unable to distinguish between the bad guys and the good guys, and maybe we just don't make good guys that are worth hero worshiping or whatever. And so I do think that there's that kind of gray area that they can fall into and be more attractive. I mean, and that's always been the case, right? Like, kids wanted to be Jesse James when they were younger, or the kids that loved the gangsters and wanted to be Al Capone and so on. There's always been that kind of hero worship of bad guys by what I would say are misguided teenagers. But then again, if misguided teenagers or young people, I should say, made $15 million from Caesar, that's more than I'm going to make this year. I know not as much as Brett will, but it's more than I'm going to make this year. So maybe they're not the ones misguided. But yeah, no, I do find it concerning. And, I hope if Scattered Spider is really based in the West, I hope that they're very quickly tracked down by law enforcement the way Lapsus was, and have their day in court.
Final question, and it's one we ask everyone. Should we ban ransom payments, or if not ban them, at least severely restrict the circumstances in which companies are allowed to pay them?
My feeling on that has evolved over time. I used to be firmly no, and I'm starting to feel like sometimes people use paying the ransom as sort of an easy cop out rather than do the hard work of recovery. What I will say is, I feel like if we're not going to ban ransom payments, and I think there's very good arguments for why we shouldn't ban them, we should require reporting of ransom payments. If you make a ransom and you report before you pay the ransom, not after, not 2 weeks later, 6 months later, wait until your SEC filing or whatever. If you pay a ransom, you have to report it before you pay the ransom. Again, if nothing else, maybe we can get some law enforcement tracing and some ways of determining if there's any way to claw that money back. And you don't get the money back. We're going to put the money into something else because you paid the ransom. But if there is required reporting every time you pay a ransom, and severe fines for not doing that reporting, then I think you can at least get a better handle on the problem.
And with that, I'd like to thank you, Allan, for joining us today. It's been really interesting to learn from your experience with cyber threats. And as always, we thank our listeners for tuning in. To stay up to date on the latest in cybersecurity, be sure to subscribe to our podcast.
Thank you all for having me. I appreciate it. It's always great talking with you all.